Welcome everyone, my name is Brendan Snyder. Thank you for joining me. I just learned about the sad news of the passing of Steve Priest. He was 72, died on June 4th of 2020. He was the founding bassist of the band Sweet. He had a hand in writing a number of their songs with the band. I'd like to pay tribute to him here and remember his musical contributions. Going back in the history of Sweet, they go all the way back to 1962, and they were first formed under the band Unit 4. The original Unit 4 actually had none of the members of Sweet, but as the years went on, they added members one by one until, of course, it eventually becomes the Sweet. Mick Turner was the first to be added on drums in 1964. Of interesting note, Ian Gillan was in the band also in 1964, of course, later leaving to join Episode 6 before joining Deep Purple and becoming who we all know him for today, but he was in the group. And then in 1966, Brian Connolly is added on vocals. So we've got two of the members of Sweet in Unit 4 by this point. But by 68, Mick Tucker and Brian Connolly decide to form a new group, and they call it the Sweet Shop. Of course, later shortening it to the Sweet, and eventually just Sweet was the name. They recruited Steve Priest on bass the same year, so he finally comes in 68, and then not until 1970, then they add Andy Scott on guitar, where we now have the classic lineup: Mick Tucker, Brian Connolly, Steve Priest, and Andy Scott. And at that point there, management group Chin and Chapman take them on, and they're also songwriters. They write their first single for them, Funny Funny. That was pretty common at that time to have outside writers for you in the 60s and the early 70s like that. And that single was released. It did really well internationally, climbing all the way to number 20 on a number of different world charts. And so in 1971, they released their debut album, Funny How Sweet Coco Can Be. A lot of the compositions, again, written by Chin and Chapman. 1972 saw the single Little Willy, which went all the way to number 3 in the US and sort of kicked off the boom behind the Sweet at that time. Sort of meteoric rise that they had. 1972 with that song, then 1973 with Ballroom Blitz, another one that is they're really famous for. That one went to number 5 in the US. But by 1974, the Sweet were kind of getting tired of the bubblegum sound that was being written by Chin and Chapman, so they adopted a more hard rock style. And in 1974, they released Sweet Fanny Adams, and this is where I come into the band. I started listening to them with this album here and going forward. I like that more harder edge sound that they took on at this point. 1974 also saw probably their most famous album, Desolation Boulevard. The reason being was that in the US they added the song Ballroom Blitz to it, but it was not originally on the album. A lot of the singles at that time that they did not appear on the album. 1975, when they released Fox on the Run, it went to number 5 in the US, but it was not on the 1975 album Give Us a Wink. Of course, later added as a bonus track, but not on the album at the time. This one, though, did include what I would consider probably the biggest hit, or the most well-known song that they're known for, the song Action. Of course, as we know, and I'm wearing a Def Leppard shirt here, if you can't recognize that, Bludgeon Raffola is their label. Def Leppard, of course, covered it. 1992-93, had their own hit with it. A lot of other bands have had a hit with it. So I know that, like, for myself, Def Leppard introduced me to the Sweet. They're huge fans of the Sweet, so that's kind of how I found them. And so 1976, though, the band's popularity begins to decline. That heyday is shrinking. And going forward, though, they do release 2 more albums with Brian Connolly on vocals. Off the Record from 1977, which is actually my personal fave. I love that, and it's the one we're listening to in the background here. And Level Headed in 1979. But by 79, Brian Connolly leaves, and the band decides to soldier on as a trio, and they release 3 more albums. And we get this one here, Cut Above the Rest in 79 also, Water's Edge 1980, and then Identity Crisis in 1982. But interestingly, by the time that Identity Crisis came out in 82, the band had actually broken up a year earlier in 1981. So it was only an album in name. There was no band behind it, no promotion behind it, nothing like that. And then a strange thing happens at this point. A bunch of versions of Sweet are formed. 1984, vocalist Brian Connolly, he forms his own version. Unfortunately, by 1997, he dies of a heart attack at age 51, passes away. 1985, guitarist Andy Scott and drummer Mick Turner formed their own version of Sweet. And by the time they start recording and releasing albums, Mick Turner's no longer involved with them, Mick Tucker. But Andy Scott's version of Sweet released this album here, which is simply called The Letter A. Then Chronology. This one called Sweet Life, or maybe just Life. Then they do a Sweet Fanny Adams Revisited, and one called New York Connection. So a number of things under the Andy Scott version of Sweet. But then by 2008, Steve Priest forms his own version of Sweet, and they do make this one live release here. So there were 3 different versions of Sweet going on roughly at the same time. Sort of the reason behind this, though, is that through court battles, Steve Priest was awarded the rights to have his version of Sweet in North America or the US, and Andy Scott was awarded the rights to do his version in the UK and Europe. They both had the rights to the name, and so that's how that was divided up. Steve Priest's Sweet did record a couple singles of studio songs. Ticket to Ride, Beatles song released in 2009, and another Beatles cover, I Saw Her Standing There, in 2010. And then in 2011, they released this album here, Are You Ready?, which is a live recording from a 2008 show. It featured Stuart Smith from Heaven and Earth on guitar. Then by 2014, Mitch Perry is tapped, and he's playing lead guitar for them. But by this point, Steve's health is really beginning to wane, and on June 4th, of course, 2020, as I just mentioned, he passed away. We don't know what the causes were at this point. May have been natural, probably related to his health issues. Certainly, though, Steve Priest's contribution to Sweet, both his presence and his songwriting, will be sorely missed, but of course his music will live on. I'm very thankful for what he was able to provide to us and give to us, the many great songs and albums he was on, and the continuation of the band Sweet for many years here in the US. Please leave your comments in regards to these memories about Steve Priest and the band Sweet. I hope everyone has a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.